Hey folks, welcome back to 3Zen. So this morning we're actually going to get airborne. With that in mind, I've got my briefing fluid here, fully topped off. I've got my checklist for today's flight. I had it for every flight in those days, and unfortunately, I've got these. Anyway, so here we go. We've done all our checks. The airplane looks good, and now we call tower for takeoff. Something like Vance Tower, Reno 17 is ready for departure, delay. Now the word delay cues them that we're going to take a delay right after airborne to hop into the IFR pattern, get picked up by Vance Rapcon, to come around for a simulated single engine approach and landing to a touch and go, then our normal departure out to the area. All right, first challenge the student has is to close the canopy. That could be real tricky in the beginning. I've seen some of them fight for a little bit of a time to get the damn thing closed, but they eventually figure it out. Okay, so now we got the canopy closed. We're taxiing out on the runway. Clear final, make sure no one's coming, and then line up on final. As you make that last little bit of turn to line up with the runway, you release nose wheel steering. Now, in theory, nose wheel steering ought to be cut out when you light the afterburners, but no one waits for that to occur. Nose wheel steering could be very sensitive on the jet as you're accelerating, so we didn't use it, just use differential braking to maintain directional control. So we get lined up, pump up the brakes, and the student runs the throttles up to military power. There's a stop up there. At that point, he checks the engines, RPM, EGT, nozzles, oil pressure, fuel flow, everything's in order, and then takes the in limits, and takes the stick and full forward, around the horn, left rudder, right rudder, everything's free and clear, we're good to go. So now, releasing brakes, rolling straight into afterburner. We had a 5-second limit for the afterburners to light. So you look down at the nozzles and you see the nozzle swing from I think 0 to 20 to 50 to 85, something like that. So now we got two good burners. The next thing we're looking for is min-accel check speed. A min-accel check speed was a speed computed at 1,000 feet that we want to see. Usually we had no problem at all reaching it. So it usually sat around 91, 92 knots at 1,000 feet. Not a problem. The next speed that we concerned ourselves was our go, no-go speed. Anything up prior to go, no-go, we would abort. After that, we were committed to takeoff because of the runway remaining. Okay, so we hit that, I can't remember, maybe 125, 130 knots, somewhere in that area. Then, about 125 knots, we start back on the back stick. And the airplane you slowly see the nose come up, and what we do is just bring it up to a takeoff attitude, and I would have shown you that on the first ride. Anyway, we bring it back on to a takeoff attitude and just let the aircraft more or less fly off the ground. As soon as we're airborne, you check the VVI and the altimeter, make sure they're both climbing. I probably shouldn't say this, but I just checked the seat of my pants anyway, and if the earth was falling away, good chance we're flying. So airspeed is doing well. Get the gear and the flaps. We had a 240 knot speed on the gear speed, so we wanted to get the gear up by that time. So okay, you get the gear and flaps up. By the end of the runway, we're approaching 280 knots. Bring the power smoothly back out of AB and bring it back 90%, somewhere in that area. Want to have enough thrust to climb, but nothing. Not anything too wild, if you will. And Vance departure, Reno 17 is airborne delay. And he'll say, radar contact, turn right heading 260 degrees. Climb, maintain 4,000 feet. So that's what we do. At 500 feet, which is the minimum altitude to pull an engine, I would say, okay, kid, you got a simulated single engine or a simulated engine failure. Looks like we just hit a bird, and I'd pull the right throttle to idle. I used to like to do that on the inside engine just to make things kind of exciting. But in reality, the engines were so close together, you could pull it one to idle, and you wouldn't hardly notice it until you had some time in the airplane. All right, at that point, the kid is operating under a simulated single engine emergency. So the first thing he has to do is go to the checklist and dig out engine fire warning during takeoff. Now, this is where we had them memorize the first few steps. They're called boldface. They were memory items. So it would be throttles max. Now, if we had a bird that we saw go in the engine, that engine we'd leave alone, but we'd take the other engine and go to full AB. Flaps 60%. Well, we took off in 60% flaps, so they should be there. And then attain airspeed above single engine takeoff speed, 10 knots desired. Usually, single engine takeoff speed, 160 knots or so forth like that was usually what that was. So, and that was, at that point where we were, was not a problem. And then come into the checklist to clean it up. So the cleanup items: gear up, flaps up. Gear up at above CETOS plus 10. Well, the gear's already up when I gave him the EP, the emergency procedure, because we're at 500 feet. You get hypoxia up there. And then flaps up, well, they were already up. And then take a look at cleanup items. So we would have them mention, okay, he's declared an emergency, a simulated emergency. At this point, turn on the downwind. As he turns on the downwind, stabilize at, bring the throttle back, stabilize at 300 knots, I think. Could have been 240, but I'm thinking it was 300 knots on downwind. And maintain that and simulate going over to the soft desk, tell them you have an emergency and what your intentions are. And I was a big proponent of telling them what you wanted to do, as opposed to letting somebody else fly your airplane at that time. You're the pilot in command. Act like it. So be like Copperhead, I think the Vance, they were Lowell, Lowell. Lowell, Reno 17 has experienced a single engine or a bird strike on departure. We're stabilized on outside downwind. We've got the boldface complete. We're working to clean up items. We should be landing in a couple minutes. We have declared an emergency, and that's about all I have to tell you. And there wasn't too much you could add for that. So now the student's got to prepare for the landing. As he goes chugging down downwind, they're going to put him on about a 9-mile final, which was typical. So comes out, turns base, and then turns downwind. As we made that transition from base to the dogleg to final, begin slowing the airspeed up to 240. And I often wanted to have the student totally configured on speed at 4 miles, completely set up. Again, like I said, directional control was not a problem. So bring the throttles back and don't come back to idle. Just bring them back and let the airspeed begin decaying a little bit. If you pulled it back to idle, your rate of decay, then you would have to shoot the power to it, and it just got into an Alphonse and Gaston act, and you didn't need that. These things could be very enjoyable to fly, actually kind of fun to fly. Anyway, so just bring the throttle back to a mid-level setting. I did, that looks about right. I use the TLAR method of instructing quite a bit. That looks about right. How far do you bring that back? I wouldn't have a clue. That looks about right. Okay. So watching the airspeed decay, come back to 240, then you don't have to shoot the power back up the mill to stabilize. Just kind of push it up. It stops it. So now as you roll on final, about, say, 8-7 miles, check your airspeeds 240 or below, put your gear down. And then as the gear comes down and locks, allow your airspeed to start to decay even further to final approach airspeed, somewhere around 175 in this case, right after takeoff. Okay, so now bring the flaps down to 60% and allow that airspeed. I always wanted to have final approach airspeed, gear, and flaps by 4 miles. Okay, so you got that all set up, and just enjoy the flight. You're lined up with the center runway, and then as you approach the glide path, it was okay to dial in your ILS. It's paid for. So dial in the ILS, you'll hear something like Reno 17, 4 mile final, you're cleared to land. So you just wait until you pick up your glide path. You got your Vances out there, you got your runway out there, everything's looking great. So now, when you come up to your glide slope, you're watching the pitch bar come down. Just crack the power a little bit, and you've got it all trimmed up. Just let it, when you crack the power, it's not going to maintain level of flight. Just let the airplane begin to settle on the glide path. If you decide you want to do something different, like pull the power back and nose it over, you're going to gain airspeed. You got to pull the power back more on it. You get in, it's a mess. Just get all trimmed up on speed, just pull the power back, and then the airplane will start settling down final. So now all you're doing is checking runway and airspeed. Runway, airspeed. Enjoy the flight, airspeed. Runway, it's fun, airspeed. So then as you come across the threshold, the book used to say when landing is assured, 100% flaps. Is assured? Yep, go to 100% flaps. And as you come across the runway threshold, just take the throttle, bring it to idle, start bringing the nose up in your flare, touchdown on speed, and enjoy the accolades from the back seat. Okay, so now we've done that. We got work to do. So now lower the nose, add power, and off we go. There was a lot of discussion about bringing the flaps up to 60% or leaving them at full. The problem you run into if you move the flaps, you could inadvertently bring them up full to the 0 flaps. So oftentimes on full stops we go to full flaps, but more often than not it was acceptable to land at 60% flaps in the early stage. That's what I do. So now you go to 60%, or you're there at 60% flaps, and you check engine instruments have spooled up. You're rolling down the runway. You're flying at airspeed, start your rotation, come airborne, gear and flaps, and now we're going out the area. And so Reno 17 airborne, area departure, whatever it was. Okay, contact departure on channel 4. Or, contact Vance departure channel 4. So you go there and tell them, hey, we're leaving Vance, we're out the area. And they say, okay, contact, I think it was Kansas City Center, then on channel 5 or whatever it was. Okay, so you do that. We would take off, fly heading of 210 degrees, all the time, climbing now up to 17,000 feet. 210 to intercept the Vance, 240 degree radial, and then on up for an area assignment. So that's about all there was to it. Fun, wasn't it?